Lord Seventh, is a priest novel. This is an audiobook made by fans for other fans. Disclaimer. The main couple of the story is made up of two men. If you don't like it, don't listen. Thank you. Remember, subscribe and click the bell to stay updated on all the new releases. Enjoy. Chapter 13. Brother Wuxia. To speak in a way that was somewhat unpleasant to hear, Ch13 was somewhat of a monster, inside and out. A lightly aged man that never got tired of messing with pills and whatever. He had a bone-thin old deist priest following behind him all year long, who had a pair of mostly white eyes, a chin sharp as an awl, and gaunt cheeks, which made people think straight away that he didn't look like a good person. Ch13's looks definitely couldn't be stated to be bad, and at first glance, he gave a vaguely breathtaking feeling. However, it was precisely the seemingly elegant young man that was even more terrifying an adversary than Helian Zhao. When all was said and done, Helian Zhao acted vicious, but he was a simple and crude man. Jing Beiyuan abruptly grabbing Wuxia made the latter jump in fright. He typically didn't allow people to get close to him. Beyond his unwillingness to be friendly with people, it was also due to the poisonous creatures he kept on hand, for example, the venomous green bamboo leaf viper wrapped around his wrist. With the other having tugged at his sleeve without any prior warning, Wuxia could distinctly sense the little snake on his wrist gently jolt in the wake of his action, sticking its head out to survey. Covered by his wide sleeve, a scarlet tongue shot out, lightly lapping at Jing Beiyuan's finger a few times. The snake's venom was curable, but, as Wuxia looked at Prince Nanning's small form, he wasn't sure whether he'd be able to fetch the antidote in time were the other to get bitten. Even if he wasn't bitten, Wuxia learned from the reaction of that eye upturning, fainting Hanlin last time that Central Plainsmen were afraid of little toxic creatures like this, and it scaring him wouldn't be good. Fingers were a very sensitive area, however, and before Wuxia had time to stuff the viper's protruding head back in, Jing Beiyuan detected something licking his hand, lowered his head, and happened to look the little green snake in the eyes. Wuxia's heart stopped beating for a tick. Yet, against expectations, Jing Beiyuan just swept a glance indifferently at it, as if the creature was an ordinary bracelet. He didn't react, nor did he let go, marginally tugging Wuxia a half-step back to not have him face Ch13 directly, after which he used his eyes to signal to Ch13. What was even stranger was that the snake stared at the other's hand, touched it with its tongue a few times, then felt it to be of no interest after a short while, ineffably pulling back and obediently coiling around Wuxia's wrist. He sighed in relief. Ch13 was older while Ch13 younger, but since the latter was the East Palace's crown prince and thus regarded as a monarch, Ch13 and Zhao always had to bow to him when they saw him. What was going on with the three brothers right now, though, everyone was well aware of on the inside. Zhao definitely didn't go over to say hello, arrogantly nodding when he saw him from a distance just like how he had always done in the past. Ch13 also made a cursory gesture, greeting him with a skin-deep smile. "Your Highness the Crown Prince." Ch13 lowered his eyes and smiled, not a trace of difficulty able to be seen on his face as he remained courteous. "Second brother. Only by being one who could bear what others wouldn't could he accomplish his empire." Jing Beiyuan pulled at Wuxia to stop, indicating that he didn't want him to speak, then retreated to the side himself, following Ch13 in a hasty greeting bow. Ch13's gaze remained on him for a moment. He smiled fakely. "I haven't seen you in some time, Beiyuan. You really have gotten all the more handsome." Those words were even more wrong. That way of speaking was obviously of a senior to a junior, a higher up to a lower down. Ch13 was an elder and a monarch, so he could talk like that. Crown Prince Helianyi was a few years older, a monarch before Prince Nanning, and wielded a good relationship with him, so he was barely qualified to talk like that. This Helianchi, however, merely occupied the appellation of scion, not even the granted title prince. If he wasn't a descendant of the royal family, then going solely by his rank, he still fell short of Jing, a genuine goods prince that had been personally bestowed that title by a holy forefather. Helianchi using such a tone, however, was as if he thought himself the superior one. If it were someone else, they would get angry and falter, supposing that they didn't just turn hostile. Fortunately, Jing-Chi's ability to play master son was not inferior to Helianyi's, and he only gently covered up his sneer. "I don't deserve the praise, Second Highness." Helianchi's gaze slashed across his body like a hook, ultimately stopping on Wuxia's. His eyes were extraordinarily good-looking, long, narrow, and curved upwards, unspeakably romantic and lovely, but Wuxia thought that the second scion's gaze was more malicious than an incredibly venomous snake. When looking face to face with him, it made one feel that a layer of extremely cold energy was floating behind their back. The other smiled at him. "Oh, I say. Isn't this the chaminette? It really wasn't easy to meet you this once, oh esteemed sir. The Crown Prince truly has a lot of prestige today." Wuxia put his hand before his chest, replying indifferent. "Second Highness." Helianchi laughed coldly, extended his fair fingers to tidy up his own sleeves, then pointed to an old dais that was equal to dry firewood, deliberately drawing out his voice and speaking in an enigmatic manner. "I have long been hearing that the chaminette possesses immense magical ability and has mastered the methodology of Nanjiang shaman craft. Daoist Brotherly has constantly begged me to be referred to you, but it seems I, Helianchi, don't have ample enough reputation. I sent my card of visitation several times, yet you always closed your door and declined guests. Perhaps you despise my social climbing." This was picking a fight on top of testing him. Wuxia stared blankly for a moment, hearing the hostility in Helianchi's words, and subconsciously tilted his head to look at Jing-Chi before he spoke. "Nanjiang Shamancraft and your Central Plains Daocraft are not the same. I think there isn't any." Jing-Chi lightly patted the back of his hand to cut him off, gathering up his own sleeves and talking to Helianchi. "You can see that this is a misunderstanding, Second Highness. You are perhaps unclear on the situation at Wuxia's place, yes. Those few little creatures he raises in his home had frightened Mr. He into illness when he came to teach, and now no teacher dares to come to his door. I'm afraid that he currently doesn't have a full comprehension of every character, so how could he comprehend your erudite invitation?" His words were friendly to the point that he even directly called out Wuxia's name. The tip of Helianchi's brow twitched as he shot him a glance. "It seems you have a very good friendship with the chaminette, Beiyuan. How come you're being such an outsider, and not helping us be recommended?" Jing-Chi beamed. "Our residences are next door. We would naturally correspond." Helianchi narrowed his eyes. Helianyi lightly coughed and placed his hand on Jing-Chi's shoulder, gently chiding him. "Beiyuan." He nodded to Helianchi shortly after. "Second brother, please. Since you have the mind to bond with the chaminette, it wouldn't do for me to not be a mediator today. However, you two can get closer at a later time. If we don't take our seats, I fear that old Lu won't be able to start the feast for his longevity day." Exactly, Lu Renking hurriedly said. "Please take your seats, Highnesses." Helianchi glanced at his hand on Jing-Chi's shoulder, smiling falsely, then turned around to leave with Daoistly. Helianyi pulled Jing-Chi all the way to his seat, like he was still treating him as a child and feared that he would run around randomly. After he was seated properly, he glared at him, suppressing his voice. "What are you doing provoking him?" Jing-Chi's lips practically didn't move, voice indistinct. "The tree desires peace, but the wind won't stop. Was I the one who went to provoke him? Besides, I all but came out carrying the 3 words Crown Prince's party on my forehead. Helian Chi finding me unpleasing to the eye didn't happen in a day or two." Helian Yi smiled, seemingly remembering something. "That's right. During your childhood, Father Emperor called for you to study, and Helian Chi had wanted you to go accompany him. You, on the other hand, weren't concerned with a bit of your reputation in the least, hugging Father Emperor's thigh and wailing your refusal, only mentioning that you didn't like him." Jing-Chi, who happened to have just raised his wine cup up, nearly choked. Why don't I remember that?" Helian Yi just grinned and said nothing. However, it was as he had said. From his youth, he and Helian Zhao could barely manage to come together in the past naturally. Helian Zhao was much too senior than him, and was preoccupied with seizing military authority as well as vilifying people to set up battles, so he didn't have the inclination to pay attention to him as a tiny, lousy kid who walked unsteadily on his path, but it was solely Helian Chi he didn't deal with. Elders claimed that children all had animal-like talents, and could catch sight of others' invisible issues. Though not sensible, they would still know who was a good person. Helian Chi was the type that was born to clash with Jing-Chi. Obviously, he was very good looking, and obviously, he had treated him well to start, but it didn't work. When he couldn't even say words, he cried heart-rendingly, lung-tearingly, mind-racingly, and liver-scratchingly upon seeing Helian Chi. It was hard to tell if they'd had some sort of ill affinity in a previous lifetime. Dark tides swelled up unspoken and under wraps, but over wraps, everyone was eating, drinking, and praising each other's stinky feet, the mood yet harmonious. After he drank 3 rounds, Helian Yi reached out and gripped Jing-Chi's hand that was lifting his wine cup to his mouth, pushed it down, then personally slipped him a chopsticks dish. "That's enough, don't just recklessly drink whenever you get a chance. I haven't seen you eat anything in a long time. Be cautious of the alcohol giving you a headache for a bit and keep it under control." Jing-Chi knew his own alcohol tolerance well, and even 1,000 cups wouldn't get him drunk, so a few shallow sips from a couple of cups was nothing. His mind had just wandered a bit. At Helian Yi's obstruction, he compliantly put the cup down and slowly started to eat. Wuxia noiselessly watched from the side, suddenly sensing that the gaze the Crown Prince looked at Prince Nanning with wasn't much like the one he used with others, its familiarity and closeness naturally not needing to be said. During Helian Yi's passing of a dish to Jing-Chi, it seemed like his features had a subtle tenderness, and a slight smile. It made him feel a bit extra sitting beside them. Wuxia wasn't aware that he wasn't alone in paying attention to that, though. Not too far away, Helian Chi's sights were continuously wandering over to the 3 of them, getting a full view of Helian Yi blocking the cup and handing him food. A fleeting wisp of a smile flitted past the corners of his thin lips, and he seemed to pointedly share a look with Daoistly. Jing-Chi's wandering mind was because of Helian Chi, actually. He understood the man too well. Helian Chi was one to recompense even a dirty look, profoundly scheming, though his behavior was too malevolent and narrow-minded. He didn't have a bit of tolerance for others, and he was suspicious and envious of talent. Now that he firmly believed that the chaminette had negated his esteem, he would likely always be conflicting with him in the future. Nonetheless, he was the one who had dragged the chaminette into this, and he needed to map out how the future path would be walked. Returning home from High Scholar Lu's longevity feast, Helian Yi noticed that the day had gotten late and it wouldn't be suitable to stay over, so he went back to the palace first on his own initiative. Wuxi and Jing returned to their estates, going the same way. Wuxi was someone not fond of making noise, and the two he had brought along out, Ashenli and Nuaher, were outright unaware of the situation. They only knew that someone had invited guests over to have a meal, after which the chaminette ate his fill, drank his fill, and then returned home, so there was nothing to be bothered about. Jing could guess that if he wasn't the one to look for conversation, then the chaminette would not know what to talk about. Not wanting to make himself look dull, he thus was silent the whole way, bringing Wuxi to the chaminette estate's front gate in person. Only then did he intend to take his leave, leading his group of boy servants and child attendants back to the estate. Yet, he suddenly heard Wuxi speak up. "Your intent, I understand." Jing paused, blinking. "What are you saying, chaminette? You be at ease. If there is a person who will become your great Qing's emperor in the future, I also hope that person is the crown prince from just now. Helian Zhao is a foe. I had offended him, he will spread harm to my clan's folk, and Helian Qi from just now, his ambitions are very big, and schemes not just, always obsessing over our Nanjiang's shaman craft. If he became emperor, then we will not have peaceful lives." Jing was harshly caught off guard. He had typically thought the kid to be somewhat dim-witted, so he didn't expect that the other was just not that great at talking, understanding things very clearly at his core. "If it's the crown prince," Jing replied, "then peaceful associations between our great Qing and Nanjiang would be a matter of course. Looking down upon commoners from up on high, wasting people and resources, and being quite inefficient are not things a benevolent monarch does. I can be at ease with you knowing these things. You can say these words in his stead." Wuxi questioned. Despite the chaminette ordinarily being muddle-headed and disregarding of the world's affairs, the only worry he had in his heart was his clan on the far horizon. Jing smiled, he and Helian Yi might actually become close friends. Others aren't aware of it, but this prince knows a thing or two about the crown prince's behavior. Don't hesitate to be rest assured about that, chaminette. Wuxi then nodded. "As it is so, I won't trouble you further," Jing said his goodbye, making to leave. Against prediction, he had just turned his horse's head when he was stopped by Wuxi's call. "Prince." For such a long period of time, the frigid chaminette had apparently never taken it upon himself to call for him before. Jing startled, turned his head back around. Wuxi lowered his eyes, as if finding it hard to begin speaking. He mumbled to himself for a lengthy while before softly asking, Can you, say my name again?" It made him reminisce of the faraway south, thinking of that old man that called his name. The great shaman stated that one's name was a highly important thing that must follow them their whole life. Names were also powerful, and if one was always calling someone's name in their heart, after a long time, that person would know, and they would be moved. Yet, upon spending a few years in the Great Qing, Wuxi felt like he was already about to entirely forget who he was, and what his name was. When he heard Jing understated words at the dinner, in spite of clearly acknowledging that he was saying them before Helian on purpose, he mentally felt like he had been struck. After waiting a long time, he looked up, only to see Jing merely open his eyes and size him up with an unclear implication. Somewhat disappointed on the inside, Wuxi hurriedly nodded at him, then turned to go into his estate. But he heard Jing say something cheerfully, "Brother Wuxi, whenever you have free time, come have a sit down at the prince's estate." He abruptly turned again to witness the smiling teen urge his horse to depart. Wuxia sensed an unspeakable feeling rush forth within him. He gently reached his left hand into his right arm sleeve, petting the ice-cold body of the little snake on his wrist, which affably rubbed against his palm. He thought of how even the snake he raised himself was not hostile towards him. End of the chapter. Stay tuned for more BL.